The Soloist Empire, Building Scalable Systems in the Age of Intelligent Machines. Written and published by Mindset Academy. Part 1. There comes a quiet turning point in the evolution of human work. A moment so subtle that many pass through it without recognition, yet so profound that it divides two entirely different ways of existing within the economic world. And it is at this intersection that the modern individual must pause and ask a question that would have seemed almost absurd in earlier generations. What if the greatest enterprise one could build no longer required the presence of many, but instead demanded the clarity, discipline, and systems thinking of one? For centuries, the dominant model of success was rooted in scale through people, where growth was measured by the expansion of teams, departments, offices, and hierarchies, and where the image of power was often associated with the number of individuals one commanded, managed, or employed. Yet beneath this outward structure lay an unspoken assumption that human labor was a primary engine of production, and that to create something meaningful, one needed to gather and coordinate the efforts of many minds, many hands, many hours. But as the world has quietly shifted into an era shaped by intelligent machines, digital infrastructure, and systems capable of performing tasks once reserved for entire teams, a new possibility has emerged, one that does not eliminate the need for human creativity, but rather amplifies in ways previously unimaginable, allowing a single individual, equipped with the right understanding and tools, to construct enterprises that operate with a level of scale, efficiency, and reach that once required organizations of immense size. This is the beginning of the Soloist Empire, not a rejection of collaboration, nor a denial of the value of human connection, but a recognition that the nature of leverage has fundamentally changed, and that the individual who learns to harness this new form of leverage can build systems that extend far beyond the limitations of their own time and effort. Yet to understand this transformation, one must first release the deeply ingrained belief that effort alone determines output. For in a world that is emerging, effort is no longer the primary constraint. Instead, the true constraint lies in design, in the ability to create systems that continue functioning, producing, and evolving even in the absence of constant human intervention. The old paradigm taught individuals to trade time for income, to equate productivity with hours spent, and to measure success by how much effort one could sustain without exhaustion. But the new paradigm invites a different kind of thinking, one that asks not how much one can do, but how much one can design, not how hard one can work, but how intelligently one can structure the work so that it multiplies itself over time. In this sense, the soloist is not merely a worker, nor even a traditional entrepreneur, but an architect of systems, a builder of frameworks within which value could be created, distributed, and sustained without requiring continuous manual input. And it is this shift from doing to designing that marks the true beginning of the solo empire. At first, this idea may feel abstract, almost intangible, especially for those who have spent years operating within environments where visibility of effort was a primary measure of contribution. But as one begins to observe the modern landscape more carefully, examples of this new reality begin to appear with increasing clarity. There are individuals who create digital products once and distribute them endlessly, their initial effort transformed into a continuous stream of value. There are creators who build audiences through content, not as an end in itself, but as a foundation upon which entire ecosystems of products, services, and opportunities can be constructed. There are developers who write code that performs the work of entire teams, and operators who design automated processes that run businesses with minimal human oversight. These are not anomalies. They are early expressions of a broader shift, signals of a future in which the boundaries between individual effort and large-scale output continue to dissolve. But perhaps the most important realization is this: the tools that enable such leverage are no longer reserved for a select few. What was once accessible only to large corporations with significant resources has gradually become available to individuals willing to learn, experiment, and adapt. The barrier is no longer access, but understanding. And so the journey of a soloist begins not with the acquisition of tools, but with the transformation of perspective. One must learn to see the world not as a series of tasks to be completed, but as a landscape of systems waiting to be designed. Every repeated action becomes a candidate for automation. Every piece of knowledge becomes a potential asset. Every problem becomes an opportunity to create a solution that can be replicated and scaled. This way of thinking requires patience, for systems rarely reveal their full power immediately. In the beginning, The soloist may still find themselves performing many tasks manually, experimenting with different approaches, learning through trial and error what could be automated, what could be delegated to machines, and what must remain within the domain of human judgment. Yet with each iteration, with each refinement, the system begins to take shape. Small efficiencies accumulate. Processes become smoother. Outputs become more consistent. What once required hours begins to require minutes, and what once demanded constant attention begins to operate quietly in the background. Over time, a subtle but powerful transformation occurs. The individual who once felt limited by the number of hours in a day begins to experience a different relationship with time. Work no longer feels like a continuous expenditure of energy, but like a series of strategic interventions within systems that are already in motion. This is the essence of the soloist empire, not the elimination of effort, but the elevation of effort to a higher level of impact, where each action contributes not only to immediate results, but to the ongoing expansion of a system that continues to generate value. Yet this path is not without its challenges. The same freedom that allows an individual to build such systems also requires a level of self-discipline and clarity that many find difficult to sustain. Without the structure of traditional organizations, the soloist must become their own strategist, their own operator, their own source of accountability. There are no predefined roles, no external deadlines imposed by hierarchy, no guaranteed pathways to follow. Instead, there is only the open field of possibility, which can be both liberating and overwhelming. For in the absence of such intention, it is entirely possible to create systems that are technically impressive yet misaligned with one's deeper goals, systems that generate income but consume attention, systems that scale output but fail to enhance life. The true solo empire, therefore, is not measured solely by its financial performance, but by its alignment with the individual's vision of autonomy, fulfillment, and long-term sustainability. It is an empire built not on the exhaustion of the builder, but on the intelligence of the design, not on the constant expansion of effort, but on the quiet multiplication of impact. And as the individual continues along this path, refining their systems, deepening their understanding, and expanding their capacity for leverage, they begin to realize that the most powerful shift of all has already taken place, not in the external world, but within their own perception. They no longer see themselves as a participant within the economy, but as a creator of structures within it, a builder of systems that can operate independently, a soloist capable of orchestrating complexity with clarity. This is where the journey truly begins. Part 2. As the soloist continues to awaken to the quiet but immense power of systems, there emerges a deeper and more unsettling realization, one that challenges the very foundation upon which most individuals have built their understanding of work, productivity, and value. And it is this: the majority of effort exerted in the modern world is not only inefficient, but unnecessary, sustained not because it is required, but because it has never been questioned with sufficient depth. For generations, people have been conditioned to equate busyness with importance, to believe that the visible exertion of effort is itself a form of value, and to organize their lives around the constant completion of tasks that, when examined closely, often contribute little to long-term progress. This pattern becomes so deeply ingrained that even when new tools and technologies emerge, tools capable of eliminating or compressing vast amounts of work, the instinct to remain occupied persists, as though stillness or simplicity were signs of inadequacy rather than mastery. The soloist, however, begins to observe this pattern with a different lens, one sharpened by the understanding that in a world of intelligent machines, the true advantage no longer lies in doing more, but in doing less of what does not matter, and far more what compounds. This distinction, though simple in appearance, requires a profound shift in perception, for it demands that the individual separate activity from effectiveness, motion from progress, and effort from impact, recognizing that these are not synonymous, despite how often they are treated as such. In the early stages of this transformation, the soloist may feel a certain discomfort, even resistance, as they begin to strip away layers of unnecessary complexity from their work. Tasks that once felt essential are questioned. Processes that were followed without thought are re-examined. Entire routines are dismantled, not out of laziness, but out of a disciplined desire to understand what truly drives results. This process is not about abandoning responsibility, but about refining it, about reducing the noise that obscures clarity and allowing the essential few actions, the ones that generate disproportionate outcomes, to become visible. It is here that the soloist encounters the principle of leverage in its most practical form, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily discipline of identifying where a single action can replace many, where a system can replace repetition, and where a decision made once can eliminate the need for countless future decisions. Leverage begins with attention, with a careful observation of how time and energy are currently being spent, and the honest recognition that much of it is directed toward tasks that do not scale, tasks that must be repeated endlessly without creating lasting value. These tasks, while often necessary in the short term, represent the limits of linear work, where output is directly tied to input, and where progress ceases the moment effort is withdrawn. The soloist does not ignore these tasks entirely, but seeks to minimize their presence, to compress them into the smallest possible space within the day, and to gradually replace them with systems that operate independently. The question that begins to guide every action becomes simple yet powerful. Can this be designed once and used many times? At first, the answers may be modest. A repetitive task might be automated. A process might be documented and streamlined. A piece of content might be repurposed across multiple platforms. These small changes, while seemingly insignificant in isolation, begin to accumulate, creating pockets of time and energy that were previously unavailable. And with each pocket of reclaimed capacity, the soloist gains the ability to think more deeply, to plan more strategically, and to invest effort into building structures that extend beyond immediate output. Over time, the focus shifts from individual tasks to entire systems. Instead of asking how to complete a specific piece of work more efficiently, the soloist begins to ask how to eliminate the need for that work altogether, or how to transform it into a process that runs with minimal intervention. This is where intelligent machines enter the equation not as replacements for human creativity, but as amplifiers of it. They handle the repetitive, the predictable, the easily structured, freeing the individual to concentrate on design, strategy, and innovation. Yet here lies a subtle danger, one that many fail to recognize until it begins to limit their progress. The temptation to use these tools merely to increase output, rather than to increase freedom. It is entirely possible to build systems that produce more content, more products, more activity, without fundamentally changing the structure of one's life. In such cases, the soloist may find themselves operating a highly efficient machine that still demands constant attention, a system that scales output but not autonomy. To avoid this trap, the soloist must remain anchored in a deeper question, one that extends beyond productivity and into purpose. Does the system reduce my dependence on constant effort, or does it merely accelerate it? The answer to this question determines whether the empire being built is one of true leverage or one of disguised labor. True leverage is quiet. It operates without constant supervision. It produces value even in moments of rest. It expands capacity without demanding proportional increases in attention. And so the soloist begins to design not only for efficiency, but for independence, seeking to create systems that, once set in motion, require only occasional refinement rather than continuous operation. This approach requires patience, for such systems rarely emerge fully formed. They are built through iteration, through cycles of testing and adjustment, through a willingness to observe what works and to discard what does not, without attachment to initial ideas. There will be moments of frustration when systems fail to perform as expected, when automation introduces new complexities, or when the simplicity sought feels temporarily out of reach. Yet these moments are not signs of failure, but of refinement, indicators that the process of design is unfolding as it must. Gradually, the systems stabilize. Processes become predictable. Outputs become consistent. The need for constant intervention diminishes. And with this stability comes a new form of confidence. Not the confidence that arises from knowing one can work hard when required, but the deeper confidence that arises from knowing that the systems one has built will continue to function even in the absence of effort. This is a foundation upon which the soloist empire is constructed. It is not built in a single moment, nor through a single breakthrough, but through the steady accumulation of systems, each one reducing the burden of repetition, each one extending the reach of the individual, each one contributing to a structure that grows quietly in the background. As this structure expands, the soloist begins to experience a subtle but profound shift in identity. They no longer see themselves primarily as a doer of tasks, but as a designer of systems, not as someone who produces value directly through effort, but as someone who creates the conditions under which value is produced continuously. This shift changes everything. For when one begins to operate at the level of systems rather than tasks, the limits that once seemed fixed begin to dissolve. Time is no longer the sole constraint. Effort is no longer the only input. The individual steps into a new relationship with work, one defined not by how much can be done in a day, but by how effectively one can design structures that endure beyond the day. And it is within this realization that the soloist moves closer to the true nature of their empire, not a collection of tasks completed, but a network of systems sustained, not a reflection of constant effort, but a testament to thoughtful design in an age where intelligence, both human and artificial, has begun to redefine what it means to build something that lasts. Part 3. As the architecture of the soloist empire begins to take form through systems carefully designed and refined over time, the individual is inevitably confronted with a deeper and more intricate layer of the journey, one that is far less visible than tools or processes, yet far more decisive in determining the ultimate scale and sustainability of what is being built. And this is a domain of decision-making, specifically the quality, speed, and clarity with which decisions are made in an environment where possibilities are nearly infinite, but attention remains profoundly finite. For in the age of intelligent machines, the constraint is no longer access to information, nor even access to capability, but rather the ability to choose, with precision and discipline, which paths are worthy of pursuit and which must be left unexplored, not because they lack potential, but because they dilute focus. The soloist, standing at the intersection of unprecedented opportunity, quickly realizes that the greatest threat to progress is not a lack of options, but an excess of them, each one appearing promising in isolation, yet collectively capable of fragmenting effort into countless directions that never fully mature into anything substantial. This condition, which might be called the paralysis of abundance, is particularly dangerous for the independent builder, because without the constraint imposed by traditional structures, managers, deadlines, external expectations, the responsibility of choosing what to pursue falls entirely upon the individual, and when it comes the burden of living with the consequences of those choices. In such a landscape, the untrained mind may drift from idea to idea, chasing novelty, reacting to trends, and mistaking movement for progress, while the trained mind learns to operate with different rhythm, one that values depth over breadth, completion over initiation, and strategic patience over impulsive action. The sovereign soloist begins to understand that every decision is not merely a selection of one path, but a rejection of many others, and that true progress often requires the courage to ignore opportunities that are good in favor of those that are essential. This principle becomes especially important when building systems intended to scale, for such systems demand a level of coherence and consistency that cannot be achieved when attention is divided across too many unrelated pursuits. And so the soloists adopt a more deliberate approach to creation, one rooted in the careful alignment of efforts around a central axis of value, a core idea, skill, or domain that serves as a foundation upon which all systems are constructed. This axis is not chosen randomly, nor is it dictated solely by external demand, but rather emerges at the intersection of three forces: what the individual can do well, what the market values, and what can be scaled through systems. When these forces align, the result is a form of leverage that extends beyond mere efficiency into the realm of compounding influence, where each piece of work contributes to a larger, interconnected structure that grows stronger over time. Consider the difference between scattered efforts and aligned systems. In the former, each action exists in isolation, producing results that are limited to the moment in which they occur. In the latter, each action reinforces the others, creating a network of value that expands organically as new components are added. The soloist who understands this begins to think less in terms of individual outputs and more in terms of ecosystems, where content leads audience, audience leads to trust, trust leads opportunity, and opportunity feeds back into the system, strengthening it further. Such ecosystems do not arise by accident. They are the result of intentional design, of decisions made not for immediate gratification but for long-term coherence, and of a willingness to invest in structures whose full value may not be realized for months or even years. This long-term orientation stands in stark contrast to the prevailing culture of immediacy, where results are expected quickly and attention is constantly pulled toward what is new, urgent, or visible. The soloist must therefore cultivate a kind of inner stability, a resistance to distraction that allows them to remain committed to their chosen path, even when alternative opportunities appear more immediately rewarding. This is not an easy discipline to maintain. The mind is naturally drawn to novelty, to the excitement of new ideas and the promise of quick wins. Yet the soloist learns, often through experience, that the most meaningful systems are built not through bursts of enthusiasm, but through sustained focus applied over time. There is a certain quiet power in this approach, a steadiness that may appear unremarkable in the short term, but reveals its strength as time passes and the system begins to mature. At a certain point, the results of this discipline become unmistakable. What once required constant effort begins to produce outcomes with increasing ease. The systems, having been refined and reinforced, start to operate with a degree of autonomy, generating value even when the individual is not actively engaged. This is the moment when the soloist begins to experience the true potential of scalable systems, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. Yet even here, the journey does not end, for with increased scale comes increased responsibility, not in the traditional sense of managing people, but in the deeper sense of maintaining alignment, ensuring that the systems continue to reflect the original intent and do not drift into complexity or inefficiency. This requires periodic reflection, a willingness to step back from the day-to-day operations and examine the structure as a whole, asking whether each component still serves its purpose, whether new opportunities should be integrated, and whether existing elements can be simplified or improved. In this way, the soloist becomes both builder and guardian, creator and curator, continuously shaping the empire not through constant activity, but through thoughtful intervention at key moments. Over time, this relationship with work begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a form of stewardship, where the individual guides the evolution of systems that, once established, possess a life of their own. And perhaps this is the most profound shift of all, the realization that one is no longer merely working within the system, but shaping it, not reacting to the demands of the environment, but designing structures that interact with that environment on one's own terms. In the age of intelligent machines, where the boundaries of what a single individual can create continue to expand, this ability to choose wisely, to focus deeply, and to build coherently becomes a defining characteristic of the soloist's empire. It is not the abundance of tools that determine success, but the discipline with which they are used. It is not the number of ideas that matters, but the clarity with which one is pursued. It is not the speed of action, but the alignment of that action with a vision that extends beyond the immediate horizon. And so the soloist continues, not hurried, not scattered, but deliberate, constructing an empire not from chaos, but from clarity, not from endless effort, but from decisions made with care in a world where the power to build has never been greater, and the responsibility to choose has never been more profound. Part 4. As the soloist advances further along this quiet yet transformative path, having begun to design systems and refine the discipline of decision-making, there arises a realization both subtle and profound, one that reshapes the very relationship between the individual and the concept of value itself. And it is this: in the age of intelligent machines, the greatest empires are no longer built upon labor or even ideas alone, but upon the ability to capture, refine, and distribute attention in a world where attention has become the most contested and fragile resource of all. For while tools have become abundant and capabilities have expanded beyond what previous generations could have imagined, the human capacity to focus has not evolved at the same pace, and thus the individual who learns to command attention, first their own, and then that of others, acquires a form of leverage that surpasses even the most advanced technologies. The soloist begins to understand that every system, no matter how elegantly designed, ultimately depends upon attention for its activation and growth. A product, no matter how valuable, requires awareness to be discovered. A message, no matter how insightful, requires focus to be absorbed. A system, no matter how efficient, requires engagement to sustain its relevance. And so the empire of the soloist is not built merely on automation or scale, but on the deliberate cultivation of attention as both an input and an output, a resource to be protected internally and a force to be directed externally. This realization introduces a new layer of responsibility. For attention, unlike other resources, is easily fragmented, easily distracted, and easily consumed by forces that offer little in return. The modern environment, saturated with endless streams of information, entertainment, and stimulation, constantly competes for the individual's focus, often pulling it toward what is immediate rather than what is meaningful. To operate effectively within this environment, the soloist must develop a form of mental sovereignty, a disciplined ability to direct attention intentionally rather than allowing it to be guided by external forces. This is not merely a matter of productivity, but of identity, for what one consistently attends to ultimately shapes what one becomes. The soloist therefore treats attention with the same care that previous generations might have reserved for capital, recognizing that it is a foundation upon which all systems are built. Without sustained focus, no system can be designed with depth. Without clarity of thought, no meaningful strategy can emerge. Without intentional direction, even the most powerful tools become instruments of distraction rather than creation. Yet the mastery of attention does not end with the self. The soloist must also learn to engage the attention of others, not through manipulation or superficial tactics, but through the creation of genuine value that resonates deeply enough to hold focus in a distracted world. This is where the concept of signal becomes central. In a landscape overwhelmed by noise, content produced in excess, messages competing for visibility, ideas repeated without depth, the individual who produces clear, thoughtful, and meaningful contributions begins to stand apart not by force, but by contrast. The soloist's empire grows not through volume alone, but through clarity, through the consistent delivery of ideas, solutions, or creations that offer something of substance in a sea of distraction. This approach requires patience, for meaningful attention is rarely captured instantly. It is built over time, through repeated exposure to value, through trust established gradually, and through the quiet recognition that what is being offered is not merely another fragment of noise, but something worthy of consideration. As this trust develops, a subtle shift occurs. The soloist is no longer chasing attention, but attracting it. The audience, whether large or small, begins to engage not out of curiosity alone, but out of genuine interest, and this engagement becomes a foundation upon which systems can expand. Content leads to connection. Connection leads to trust. Trust leads to opportunity. And opportunity, when structured correctly, feeds back into the system, strengthening it further. Yet here again, the soloist must remain vigilant. The pursuit of attention can easily become an end in itself, leading to creation of content or products designed solely to capture interest rather than to deliver value. In such cases, the system may grow in visibility but weaken in substance, becoming dependent on constant stimulation rather than sustained trust. The true solo empire avoids this trap by maintaining alignment between attention and value, ensuring that what is captured is also honored, that what is promised is also delivered, and that growth does not come to the expense of integrity. This alignment becomes increasingly important as systems scale, for with greater reach comes greater influence, and with greater influence comes a responsibility to use that influence wisely. The soloist, therefore, does not seek to dominate attention, but to direct it meaningfully, to create spaces where ideas can be explored, where solutions can be shared, and where value can be exchanged in a way that benefits both creator and audience. Over time, this approach leads to formation of what might be called an attention infrastructure, a network of channels, platforms, and touchpoints through which value flows consistently and predictably. This infrastructure, once established, becomes one of the most powerful assets within the soloist's empire, for it allows new ideas, products, or systems to be introduced with far greater ease than if one were starting from nothing each time. The individual no longer operates in isolation, but within a dynamic ecosystem where attention, trust, and value circulate continuously. And yet, despite the external expansion of the system, the soloist must never neglect the internal dimension. for the ability to sustain such an empire depends upon the continued mastery of one's own focus. There will always be new tools, new trends, new opportunities competing for attention, each one promising to accelerate growth or simplify complexity. Some of these will be valuable, others merely distractions in disguise. The soloist must therefore cultivate discernment, the ability to distinguish between what aligns with the core system and what diverts from it. This discernment is not developed overnight. It emerges through experience, through observing the consequences of past decisions, and through a deepening understanding of what truly drives progress within one's unique context. With time, the noise begins to fade. The constant urgency of the external world loses its grip. The soloist moves with greater calm, greater clarity, and greater confidence, no longer reacting to every signal, but responding only to those that align with the deeper structure of the empire being built. And in this state, something remarkable happens. The individual begins to operate not from a place of scarcity, where attention is constantly fought over, but from a place of quiet authority, where attention flows naturally toward what is clear, consistent, and valuable. The empire, once fragile and uncertain, begins to stabilize, supported not only by systems and tools, but by the intangible yet powerful force of trust and focus. This is the maturation of the soloist path. It is no longer about building systems alone, nor about making decisions in isolation, but about integrating these elements into a cohesive whole, where attention, value, and design work together in harmony. And as this harmony deepens, the soloist comes to understand that the true power of their empire lies not in its size, but in its coherence, not in how much it produces, but in how well it aligns, not in how loudly it speaks, but in how clearly it resonates within a world that has forgotten how to listen. Part 5. As the soloist empire continues to evolve, shaped not only by systems and attention, but by the quiet discipline of alignment, there emerges a deeper layer of understanding that few reach without prolonged reflection, and it is this. The greatest threat to a scalable life is not failure, but subtle complexity, the slow, almost invisible accumulation of moving parts that begin as solutions, but eventually harden into constraints, transforming what was once a fluid and intentional system into something heavy, rigid, and quietly demanding. In the early stages of creation, complexity often feels like progress. For each new tool, each additional feature, each expanding channel appears to increase capability, to widen reach, to enhance performance, and for a time, this perception holds true as the system grows and new layers are added, producing outputs that were previously impossible. But as the structure expands, a shift begins to occur, one so gradual that it is rarely noticed until the effects become undeniable, and that shift is a transition from design simplicity to unmanaged complexity, where the system no longer serves a soloist with clarity, but instead begins to require constant maintenance, constant attention, constant correction. What was once liberating becomes burdensome. What was once scalable becomes fragile. What was once a source of autonomy becomes, in a quieter and more insidious way, another form of dependency. The soloist who fails to recognize this pattern may find themselves operating an empire that appears impressive from the outside, yet internally feels chaotic, fragmented, and exhausting, as though each new layer of growth has come at the cost of increased obligation. This is the paradox of modern leverage. The same tools that allow for extraordinary scale also make it dangerously easy to build systems that exceed one's ability to manage them with clarity. And so, at this stage of the journey, the soloist must confront a new discipline, one that is less about creation and more about refinement, less about expansion and more about reduction. It is the discipline of simplification. To simplify is not to diminish nor to retreat from growth, but to distill a system to its essential components, to remove what no longer contributes meaningfully, and to ensure that each part serves a clear and necessary purpose within the whole. This requires a form of honesty that many find difficult to sustain, for it often involves letting go of work that required effort to build, abandoning tools that once felt indispensable, and resisting the temptation to continually add rather than refine. The soloist must learn to ask, with increasing precision, not what can be added, but what can be removed without loss of function, what can be consolidated without loss of clarity, and what can be eliminated entirely without disrupting the integrity of the system. This process is not merely technical. It is philosophical. It demands that the individual define what truly matters, what outcomes are essential, and what level of complexity is justified by the value it produces. Without such clarity, systems tend to grow in all directions, accumulating features, processes, and dependencies that dilute focus and increase friction. With clarity, however, the system begins to contract towards core, shedding unnecessary weight and revealing a structure that is both more elegant and more resilient. The soloist begins to notice that the most powerful systems are often the simplest, not because they lack sophistication, but because their sophistication is hidden beneath a surface of clarity, where each component interacts seamlessly with the others, requiring minimal intervention to maintain balance. In this state, the system becomes almost self-sustaining, not in the sense that it requires no attention, but in the sense that the attention it requires is focused, intentional, and limited to areas of genuine impact. This is where true scalability emerges, not from endless expansion, but from the careful alignment of parts within a structure that can grow without becoming unwieldy. Yet simplicity alone is not enough. The soloist must also consider resilience, for in a world defined by constant change, systems that are overly rigid, no matter how efficient, may fail when conditions shift. Resilience is the ability of a system to adapt without collapsing, to absorb disruption without losing function, and to evolve without requiring complete reconstruction. To build such resilience, the soloist avoids overdependence on any single tool, platform, or channel, recognizing that external systems are subject to forces beyond one's control. Instead, they design with flexibility in mind, ensuring that core assets, knowledge, audience relationships, intellectual property, and foundational systems can be transferred, adapted, or restructured as needed. This approach transforms the empire from a static structure into a living system, capable of adjusting to new environments without losing its identity. And as this balance between simplicity and resilience is refined, the soloist begins to experience a new quality of operation, one characterized not by constant activity, but by quiet control. The system runs. The outputs flow. The need for intervention diminishes. Time once consumed by maintenance is gradually returned to the individual. And with this return of time comes a deeper opportunity, not merely to rest, but to think. For it is in these spaces of regained attention that the soloist can step beyond the immediate demands of the system and consider its long-term direction, its alignment with personal values, and its potential for further evolution. Part 6. At this stage of the soloist's journey, a profound shift begins to emerge, one that moves beyond tools, systems, attention, and the careful orchestration of simplicity and resilience, and descends into more subtle, yet infinitely more powerful realm of identity and perspective. For the creation of a solo empire is not solely a matter of external construction. It is equally, and perhaps more so, a transformation of how one perceives oneself within the vast and ever-evolving landscape of work, opportunity, and technological capability. The soloist discovers that the systems they build are reflections not only of skill and strategy, but clarity, discipline, and self-mastery, and that the true limitation is no longer found in resources, tools, or external obstacles, but in the depth of their own understanding of who they are as a creator, designer, and orchestrator of value. This realization begins with a quiet observation that independence is never merely an outcome of automation or scale. Autonomy, the condition so often sought yet so rarely attained, is instead a product of internal alignment, the alignment of purpose, vision, and execution. A system can produce outputs endlessly, yet if it is divorced from the deeper intentions of its creator, it remains an instrument without soul, a reflection of external possibility rather than internal mastery. The soloist therefore turns inward, examining not only what the empire produces, but why it exists and how each choice, each design, each mechanism expresses their values and priorities in a world increasingly capable of producing and consuming without reflection. In this reflective state, the individual begins to recognize patterns that were previously invisible. They see how habitual reactions, fears of scarcity, and invisible weight of cultural expectations often shape decisions more than strategy, insight, or clarity. Each system built without awareness of these influences carries embedded limitations. It may function efficiently, yet still confine the creator within invisible constraints. By bringing these elements into conscious view, the soloist gains the ability to design not only outward systems, but inner ones, mental architectures that determine focus, resilience, and a consistent application of effort toward what truly matters. The most subtle, yet transformative, of these insights is the understanding of leverage as a multidimensional principle. Early in the journey, leverage was perceived largely in external terms, how machines, processes, or digital tools could amplify output. Now, it becomes clear that leverage also exists internally, in how attention is directed, in how emotions and motivations are managed, and in how cognitive energy is deployed to maximize creative impact. The soloist learns that even the most sophisticated external system is limited if the inner systems, habits, focus, decision-making clarity, and mental resilience are underdeveloped or fragmented. It is within this integration of internal and external leverage that the true power of a solo empire manifests, for one cannot sustain scale or autonomy without both dimensions operating in harmony. In practical terms, this phase of development is marked by a disciplined orchestration of the following: the careful curation of environments that reinforce desired behaviors, the construction of routines that maximize cognitive energy, and the conscious selection of inputs, books, ideas, collaborations, and experiences that continuously expand perspective while reinforcing the central axis of purpose. Every action is measured not merely by its immediate output, but by its contribution to the reinforcement of internal systems that maintain clarity, focus, and alignment. The soloist recognizes that the effort spent on these metasystems is not ancillary but foundational, for without them, even the most brilliantly designed external systems eventually drift, decay, or demand disproportionate intervention. This understanding brings with a profound sense of freedom, for it reframes struggle not as a function of external scarcity, but as a signal for internal refinement. Obstacles, inefficiencies, or unexpected outcomes become not crises to be reacted to blindly, but data points illuminating the alignment or misalignment of one's inner systems. The empire, in this sense, is both mirror and teacher. It reflects where one's decisions, focus, and attention have succeeded, and where latent weaknesses require deliberate adjustment. The soloist, increasingly attuned to this interplay, begins to approach work with a different posture. Not hurried, not reactive, but strategic, deliberate, and deeply aware of the long horizon over which real impact accumulates. And within this long horizon, the soloist discovers the ultimate multiplier: patience. In a world obsessed with immediacy, where attention is fragmented and expectations of rapid results dominate, patience is both counterintuitive and invaluable. It is the ability to allow systems to mature, to allow compounding forces to unfold, and to refrain from intervening unnecessarily simply because the mind craves visible action. Systems designed with patience tend to endure. Systems built hurriedly tend to fracture. The soloist cultivates a rhythm in which design, iteration, and observation are harmonized with action, understanding that premature intervention often diminishes long-term effectiveness, while measured, thoughtful refinement produces exponential growth over time. Perhaps the most subtle yet powerful manifestation of this stage is the transformation of identity itself. The soloist no longer perceives themselves merely as a worker, creator, or entrepreneur. They begin to inhabit the role of architect, strategist, and steward. The focus shifts from accumulation of output, attention, or immediate revenue to construction and curation, building frameworks capable of sustaining themselves, refining systems that reinforce both external outcomes and internal coherence, and shaping environments that maximize the emergence of desired results with minimal friction. The empire is no longer something external that the individual operates, but a co-created ecosystem that amplifies the capabilities, intentions, and mastery of its architect. And so, the soloist comes to a profound understanding. The age of intelligent machines is not simply an era of opportunity, but a mirror reflecting the state of the mind. Machines can augment skills, scale output, and automate repetition, yet they cannot replace clarity of vision, alignment of purpose, or the disciplined orchestration of systems that are coherent both externally and internally. Those who master this integration, the harmony of mind, system, and leverage, become not merely operators of businesses, but sovereign architects of their own lives. The empire of the soloist is therefore both tangible and invisible. Tangible in the products, systems, and outputs that touch the world, invisible in the discipline, clarity, and internal architecture that sustain it. And within this duality lies the ultimate lesson. The strength of a solo empire is never defined solely by what it produces in the external world, but by how it reflects the mastery, intentionality, and vision of the individual who created it. This stage marks the threshold into the deepest potential of the soloist path, a threshold where effort, intelligence, and patience converge into a practice that is at once creative, strategic, and profoundly freeing. The journey continues, not toward endless accumulation, but toward deliberate, self-sustaining influence, the quiet mastery of systems, and emerge into a solo empire that thrives not by chance, but by design. Part 7. As the soloist approaches the advanced stages of constructing their empire, a transformation occurs that transcends the mechanics of systems, automation, and leverage. It enters a realm of subtle mastery over time itself, an understanding that time is neither infinite nor merely a sequence of hours to be filled, but a malleable force that responds to intention, design, and the strategic orchestration of energy, focus, and priorities. For the soloist who has built robust systems, captured and aligned attention, and cultivated clarity of purpose, the next horizon is the mastery of temporal leverage, the capacity to extend influence and output beyond the natural limits imposed by a single human life, not by working harder or longer, but by orchestrating actions in ways that ripple through systems, people, and opportunities with enduring effect. Time, in this context, is no longer measured solely by the ticking of clock, but by the accumulation of value, the depth of impact, and the degree to which actions compound within both internal and external structures. The soloist begins to perceive each decision not as an isolated act, but as a node within a vast temporal network, where a single choice today can produce consequences and opportunities months or years hence, provided it is executed with insight, precision, and alignment with the broader architecture of the empire. The realization is both liberating and weighty. Liberation arises from the understanding that one need not expend endless effort to achieve lasting influence. Weight arises from the responsibility to ensure that each choice contributes to coherent, long-term outcomes rather than transient gains. It is here that patience, foresight, and rhythm coalesce into a new discipline, the orchestration of compound influence. The soloist, having already mastered the interplay between attention, decision-making, and system design, now learns to operate with a horizon that stretches far beyond the immediate, a horizon defined not by the next task or output, but by the enduring trajectory of the entire empire. Within this horizon, small, deliberate actions gain power because they are carefully integrated into pre-existing structures, designed to multiply and magnify over time. A single initiative, thoughtfully placed, can catalyze waves of productivity, engagement, or innovation that extend far beyond what was initially envisioned, creating the effect of exponential growth without linear expansion of effort. Yet the soloist must also guard against the temptation to over-engineer, to overextend, or to chase outcomes beyond the strategic horizon. In a world where intelligent machines and digital systems amplify action, it is remarkably easy to fall into the illusion that more activity necessarily produces more impact. The truly advanced soloist, however, recognizes that activity without integration, growth without coherence, and output without alignment are not forms of leverage but forms of dilution, gradually eroding both clarity and control. The wisdom, therefore, lies in selective amplification, choosing the few actions, investments, or interventions that generate the greatest compounding effect, while ignoring the multitude of peripheral activities that demand attention without producing lasting value. At this stage, the soloist begins to inhabit a paradoxical space. The empire grows larger, more intricate, and more capable, yet the individual themselves often exerts less continuous effort than at earlier stages. What was once labor-intensive becomes principle-driven. What was once managed moment to moment becomes guided by design, iteration, and selective intervention. The daily rhythm shifts from frantic execution to mindful orchestration, where the primary work of the soloist is to ensure that all moving parts remain aligned with purpose, capable of adapting to change, and positioned to compound over time. It is in this refined state that the soloist also begins to experience the extraordinary freedom inherent in mastery over systems and time. With attention, energy, and decision-making aligned, the individual is no longer enslaved to the daily urgencies that consumed earlier stages. They possess the latitude to explore, to innovate, and to expand horizons, not as a matter of obligation, but as an expression of strategic creativity. This freedom, paradoxically, is both the reward and the test of the journey. the ability to remain disciplined in the face of limitless possibility, to resist the seduction of activity for its own sake, and to invest in only those avenues that reinforce both the empire's coherence and the soloist's deeper vision. Finally, the soloist comes to profound awareness of legacy, not in the superficial sense of public recognition or fame, but in the subtle, enduring influence of systems and structures that persist beyond immediate attention or personal oversight. The empire becomes a living entity that transcends the limits of the individual, operating continuously, responding to change, and generating value in ways that were impossible before the mastery of leverage, systems, attention, and time. In this realization, the soloist perceives a deeper truth. The empire is not merely an external construct, but a reflection of internal sovereignty, a manifestation of disciplined thought, intention, and action harmonized with the capabilities of the modern age. In this advanced stage, the soloist no longer perceives challenges as obstacles, but as opportunities to refine the interplay between internal mastery and external systems. Every disruption, every unforeseen event, every shift in the environment is treated as feedback, data to inform design, adjustment, and strategic evolution. Through this lens, the soloist achieves what may have once seemed impossible: the creation of a dynamic, self-sustaining, and ever-expanding empire capable of scaling far beyond conventional limitations, while preserving the clarity, autonomy, and presence of the individual at its core. Thus, the journey reaches a point of convergence. Systems, attention, clarity, simplicity, resilience, and temporal leverage all coalesce into a single, cohesive practice, a practice which the soloist operates not merely as a participant in the modern economy, but as a sovereign architect of an empire that embodies both tangible achievement and the enduring principles of mastery, intentionality, and freedom. In this space, the soloist empire is no longer a concept or aspiration. It becomes a living testament to what a single individual, armed with knowledge, discipline, and vision, can construct in an age where intelligence, both human and artificial, has the power to extend influence, amplify impact, and transform life itself. Part 8, the final stage. And now, having traversed the intricate landscape of creation, mastery, and reflection, the soloist arrives at the culmination of the journey, a stage where all prior lessons, system design, attention management, decision-making, simplification, resilience, internal leverage, and temporal mastery converge into a state of profound sovereignty. It is here, in this rarefied space, that the soloist fully comprehends the ultimate truth of building a solo empire in the modern age, that the empire itself, while tangible in outputs and systems, is first and foremost a mirror of the individual, a manifestation of their discipline, vision, and understanding of life's deeper principles. At this stage, the soloist no longer measures success by conventional metrics alone, revenue, audience size, or productivity, but by the coherence and harmony of the entire structure. Every system, every channel, every process has been refined to reflect intentionality. Nothing exists merely for the sake of action, visibility, or fleeting gain. The empire has become both a canvas and a tool, a canvas upon which the soloist expresses their values, creativity, and long-term vision, and a tool through which impact can be amplified and sustained without constant personal exertion. It is a rare form of freedom, one that emerges not from the absence of work, but from the presence of mastery. In this space, the soloist understands that the greatest leverage does not come from the tools themselves, nor even from the systems they operate, but from the clarity and sovereignty of thought guiding every action. Every choice is considered not only for its immediate outcome, but for its ripple effects across the interconnected web of systems, relationships, and opportunities that comprise the empire. The ability to perceive the long horizon, to weigh decisions in the light of compounding consequences, and act in alignment with an overarching vision distinguishes the true architect from the mere operator. And yet, mastery carries with a paradoxical humility. The soloist recognizes that control is never absolute, that even the most elegant systems are subject to external forces, fluctuations, and the unpredictable nature of human and technological ecosystems. The lesson is not to seek dominance over every variable, but to design structures that are resilient, adaptive, and capable of enduring in the face of uncertainty. In doing so, the soloist achieves a rare balance, an empire that scales autonomously, yet remains anchored in purpose, powerful yet supple, vast yet coherent. At this highest stage, the the distinction between work and life begins to blur, for the empire ceases to be a task to be managed and becomes an extension of the self, a living, dynamic reflection of thought, intent, and action. The soloist experiences profound alignment. The internal state harmonizes with external structures, and effort is no longer linear or exhausting, but deliberate, strategic, and deeply creative. Time, energy, and attention, once fragmented, are now orchestrated with precision, creating not merely outputs, but lasting influence, insight, and value that persists far beyond immediate observation. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this stage is the realization of autonomy, not just in work, but in life itself. The soloist is no longer beholden to external pressures, trends, or expectations. With systems humming quietly in the background, attention and energy conserved and directed wisely, and temporal leverage fully realized, the individual possesses the freedom to explore, create, and live according to principles of their own choosing. The empire becomes a sanctuary, a platform, and a force for compounding impact, a testament to the deliberate integration of intelligence, design, and wisdom. And so, the final lesson of the soloist emerges with clarity. To build a scalable, self-sustaining empire is not merely to amass tools, systems, or wealth. It is to cultivate the internal faculties that allow one to operate at the highest level of coherence and sovereignty. Every system, every process, every mechanism is a reflection of the inner state. Every measure of impact is amplified by clarity of purpose and mastery of attention. The soloist learns that lasting empires are not constructed hurriedly or by accident. They are the culmination of patience, reflection, iteration, and a disciplined commitment to aligning internal mastery with external design. This is the ultimate manifestation of the soloist empire, a life and work fully integrated, a structure that amplifies thought without enslaving the thinker, and a presence in the modern economy that is both autonomous and enduring. It is not built for recognition, applause, or external validation, but for the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing that one has created systems that work in harmony with one's vision, values, and life purpose. A solo empire, truly sovereign. In an age where intelligent machines, unprecedented opportunity, and human ingenuity converge. Here, the journey reaches its zenith. The soloist has transformed from a doer of tasks to a designer of systems, from a reactive participant to a deliberate architect, and from a worker constrained by effort to a sovereign creator whose empire extends influence, value, and impact far beyond the immediate moment. In this realization, the soloist glimpses the true power of autonomy, the elegance of strategic leverage, and the enduring freedom that arises when inner mastery and external design are brought together with clarity, intention, and patience. This is a quiet triumph of the soloist's path, not in what is seen, not in what is counted, but in what is achieved through deliberate alignment, thoughtful orchestration, and the sovereign application of human potential in a world transformed by intelligence, both natural and artificial. The empire endures because it is grounded in principle, refined by wisdom, and animated by the sovereign will of its architect, one individual, infinitely leveraged, quietly reshaping the possibilities of what a single human being can accomplish in the modern age.